Every mystery has a voice. Few dare to listen.
The storm had been worrying Ashcombe Hall all evening since dusk without mercy, shaking the leaded windows with the persistence of a creditor who had been refused twice and had come back with witnesses. By 11 o'clock the rain had turned the gravel drive black, and the old house seemed less a residence than a respectable animal attempting sleep while somebody prodded it with a stick. It was therefore unfortunate that Miss Lydia Finch discovered a dead man in the attic. For those watching from home, there is one small question worth settling before we enter the house. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Put it in the comments. A murder at 10:30 in Norfolk may be breakfast time elsewhere, which is one of the many inconveniences of international detective work. Miss Finch had not intended to discover anything more sinister than damp. She had been engaged to inspect the family pictures before the roof restoration, and had spent the evening scraping dust from a chimney breast built by a mason with a grudge against straight lines. At approximately 11 she found the loose brick. Behind it lay canvas. She drew it out carefully, coughing as a cloud of grey dust rose around her. The canvas was wrapped in old linen and stiff with age. When she loosened the cloth and raised her lamp, she saw the face, Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, or so it appeared. The resemblance to the celebrated portrait downstairs was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same long pale face, the same narrow shoulders, the same black velvet gown. Yet there was something wrong with the expression. The famous portrait showed Lady Beatrice looking serenely beyond the painter. As though the world were a tiresome but manageable obligation, this woman looked frightened. Miss Finch stared at her. Then somebody screamed. The scream came from the far end of the attic. Miss Finch ran. Sir Julian Ashcombe lay beside the writing desk, one arm crooked beneath him, his silver head turned toward the floor. A dark stain marked the back of his hair. The brass weight used by the restoration staff lay several feet away. The attic door stood closed. When Miss Finch tried the handle, it would not move. The key was inside. By the time Thomas Greaves arrived with a poker and Mrs. Agnes Bell behind him, the storm seemed to have found its way into the house itself. Everyone spoke at once, nobody listened, and the old servant's bell beside the attic door gave a sudden metallic rattle that made Mrs. Bell cross herself before remembering that she was a Protestant. Dr. Martin Vale was summoned. Inspector Charles Parker came soon afterwards. And, somewhat later, Lord Peter Wimsey arrived in a motor car which had objected violently to the Norfolk roads and had deposited its distinguished passenger at the front door, looking as though he had merely been inconvenienced by the weather rather than attacked by it. Wimsey removed his gloves. "Good evening," he said. "I understand the house has acquired a corpse." Parker regarded him. "Sir Julian Ashcombe, upstairs, and the locked door, still locked. Excellent, the traditional beginning. One always feels reassured by tradition." Parker led him through the long gallery. The gallery was lined with portraits of dead Ashcombes, each possessing the fixed expression of somebody who had been interrupted during an important thought. At the center hung the famous portrait of Lady Beatrice. Wimsey stopped. He looked at it for several seconds. "Ah," he said. Parker glanced back. "You know it. I know portraits. They are generally more communicative than their subjects and considerably less expensive to question." At the far end of the gallery, Eleanor Ashcombe stood beside Beatrice Ashcombe. Eleanor's face was composed, almost rigid. Beatrice looked as though she had been personally insulted by death. "Sir Julian was in the attic with Miss Finch," Parker said. "She found the other portrait and then found him." "The other portrait?" Parker nodded. They climbed the narrow stairs. The attic smelled of dust, wet timber, and old paint. The newly discovered canvas had been placed against the chimney breast. Wimsey approached it without touching. He looked first at the painted face, then at the corpse, then at the door. "Curious," he murmured. Parker sighed. "What is? I haven't decided yet." Dr. Vale stood beside the body. "I should say the death occurred sometime between 10:30 and 11, he said. Wimsey glanced toward the corridor clock visible through the open doorway. It showed 10:29. "The bell rang at 10:47, said Mrs. Bell. "I heard it myself. Sir Julian used it when he wanted somebody." And you came immediately? Yes, my lord. Did you hear anything before the bell? No. After it? No, my lord. Wimsey inclined his head. He did not look surprised. Thomas Greaves stood by the door, his thin face as blank as the marble busts in the gallery. The bell has never been troublesome before, he said. Mrs. Bell gave him a look. It has been troublesome twice this month. Once, said Greaves. Twice. Once. Wimsey examined the two of them with mild interest. How encouraging, he said. Even the machinery of the house has learned to disagree with the servants. Parker frowned. You think the bell matters? Wimsey smiled faintly. I think bells are designed to announce things. Whether they announce the truth is another question. He walked back toward the newly uncovered portrait. Up close, the painted face was stranger still. Lady Beatrice's eyes seemed directed not toward the painter, but toward something beyond his shoulder. A suggestion of terror had been caught there, frozen beneath the varnish. Wimsey studied it without comment. Then his gaze moved to the corridor clock. The minute hand had advanced. He raised one eyebrow. Clocks, he observed, are such innocent little liars. Outside, thunder rolled over the marsh, and somewhere in the old house, a bell gave a single, lonely click. Section 2. The house that knows nothing. Morning came to Ashcombe Hall without bringing any conviction that it had ever been invited. Rain blurred the windows, the chimneys smoked badly, and the breakfast room possessed that peculiar silence in which every teaspoon appears to have acquired a conscience. Inspector Charles Parker had arranged the household at the long table and was questioning them one by one. Lord Peter Wimsey sat at the far end with coffee, toast, and an expression of cultivated innocence. Mrs. Agnes Bell was first. You say the bell rang at 10:47. Yes, sir. Precisely? I looked at the clock when I heard it. Which clock? The one in the passage. Wimsey raised his eyes. Mrs. Bell noticed and became defensive. It said 10:47. I remember because I thought Sir Julian was working late. Did the bell sound as it usually did? Yes. Loud? Quite loud. And continuous? One ring, a sharp one. Parker leaned forward. You went upstairs? I went as far as the attic door. I called, but Sir Julian did not answer. Did you hear movement inside? No. Anything else? Mrs. Bell hesitated. No. Wimsey buttered his toast. Nothing at all. The housekeeper looked at him. My lord. It is a useful phrase, nothing at all. People use it when they mean anything from nothing to something extremely inconvenient. Mrs. Bell's mouth tightened. I heard the storm. Before the bell? Yes. After? I cannot remember. Wimsey nodded and asked no more. Thomas Greaves followed. He stood behind his chair rather than sitting in it. You heard the bell? Yes, my lord. At what time? 10:47. Did you look at a clock? No. Then how do you know? Mrs. Bell told me. Wimsey's eyebrow lifted. Parker frowned. But you said yesterday that you heard it at 10:47. I knew the approximate time. Approximate, within a few minutes. Mrs. Bell shifted in her chair. Wimsey turned to her. You were certain? Yes. And Mr. Greaves? I said approximate. Quite. He smiled pleasantly. Between a clock and a butler, I generally trust the butler. The clock cannot be embarrassed by its mistakes. Greaves's face remained perfectly expressionless. Parker produced his notebook. You repaired the attic bell last month. The wiring. Why? An intermittent fault. What sort? The bell sometimes failed to ring. Could it ring when nobody pulled the cord? No. The answer came rather quickly. Wimsey looked at him. Greaves met his gaze. Neither man spoke. Parker continued. You are certain? Yes. Very well. Wimsey took another piece of toast. Beatrice Ashcombe was interviewed next. She was less cooperative than either servant, largely because she considered questions about the household an intrusion into family dignity. Sir Julian had enemies, she said. Many? Asked Wimsey. Not personally. An interesting distinction. He was an exacting man. Were you fond of him? Beatrice looked offended. He was my brother. Ah, that answers the question without answering it. She ignored him. Julian became obsessed with the attic recently. He was forever looking through old papers. Did he tell you why? No. Did he mention the second portrait? Her expression altered, only slightly. I knew there was an old picture somewhere. Did you know it was a portrait of Lady Beatrice? I assumed so. Why? Because it resembles her. Wimsey glanced toward the rain-streaked window. Most portraits do have that advantage. Beatrice lowered her voice. That painting should never have been brought out. Why? Because some things are better left where they were put. Parker looked interested. Wimsey merely smiled. Dust is remarkably good at keeping secrets, he said. Eleanor Ashcombe entered after her aunt. She was composed, pale, and dressed in dark gray. You were in your room after dinner? Yes. Until when? Until I heard the disturbance. Did you hear the bell? Yes. From your room? I heard something. I cannot say whether it was the bell. Wimsey watched her carefully. Did Sir Julian seem troubled at dinner? No. Did he say anything unusual? No. Nothing about the attic? No. Nothing about the portrait? No. Eleanor's answers were calm. Wimsey leaned back. And yet, he said lightly, you knew there was a portrait. She paused. Miss Finch had told us she was examining the chimney breast. Indeed, and everyone knew she was working there. Quite. There was no accusation in his voice. There was not even curiosity that could easily be called curiosity. Eleanor seemed relieved. Parker asked about Rupert. He quarreled with Sir Julian yesterday afternoon, she said. Violently. Yes. What about? Money. Wimsey looked toward the door. Rupert was waiting outside. Ah, he murmured. The ancient duet. Money and relatives. Rupert entered, but Parker dismissed him almost immediately, saying he would be questioned separately. When the interviews were over, Dr. Martin Vale joined Wimsey in the corridor. You look unconvinced, the doctor said. I am not yet convinced of anything. You think my estimate is wrong? Wimsey smiled. I think estimates are admirable things, Doctor. They permit us to be approximately certain while remaining precisely wrong, Doctor. Vale laughed, despite himself. From above came a faint metallic sound. Both men looked up. The attic bell had not rung. It was only the wind moving through the old house. Wimsey continued down the corridor, hands behind his back. At the staircase he stopped. Doctor? Yes. Last night, when you examined Sir Julian, did you hear the bell yourself? No. Mrs. Bell told me it had rung. Thank you. He resumed walking. Behind him, Dr. Vale watched thoughtfully. At the end of the passage, Wimsey paused beside the wall clock, but did not touch it. He simply listened to the rain. Somewhere below, a door closed softly, followed by the muted clatter of china. Nobody appeared to notice. Wimsey did. He turned his head, waited a moment, and then smiled as though the house had whispered something mildly impertinent in his ear politely. The house, meanwhile, continued to insist that it knew nothing at all. Section 3. The nephew with the blood-stained cuff. Inspector Charles Parker produced Rupert Ashcombe from the library at 11 o'clock, and the young man entered with the air of someone who had been accused of being both insolvent and untidy. His blonde hair was damp from the rain. One cuff was torn. There was a dark reddish stain upon it. Parker placed a folder on the table. Rupert, he said, you quarreled with Sir Julian yesterday. Yes, you threatened him. I said I would see him damned before I asked him for another penny. Your uncle intended to cut you out of his will. I suppose so. Did you know that? I knew he was going to. Wimsey, seated by the window, looked up from the newspaper. An admirable family arrangement, he observed. Rupert ignored him. Parker pointed at the cuff. What is that? Blood. Whose? Mine. You expect us to believe that? Rupert gave a short laugh. You may believe whatever you like. I cut my hand yesterday. How? I broke the greenhouse latch. Why? Because I was angry. At your uncle? Yes. Parker looked at Wimsey. Wimsey continued reading. Very convenient, Parker said. Is it? Asked Rupert. You were heavily in debt. Your uncle refused you money. You quarreled with him. You were seen near the attic shortly before his death. Rupert's face hardened. I was not near the attic last night. Where were you? In the billiard room. Alone? Yes. Convenient again. Rupert stood suddenly. I didn't kill him. Wimsey folded the newspaper. Nobody asked you whether you did. Rupert stared at him. You've been asking everyone questions, an unfortunate habit. You think I did it. Wimsey regarded him pleasantly. I think you have managed to acquire several of the qualities traditionally associated with murder without actually acquiring the murder itself. Parker frowned. Meaning? Meaning nothing at present, Rupert laughed bitterly. That is a clever way of saying you suspect me. No, said Wimsey. It is a clever way of saying that I have not finished listening. Parker turned back to Rupert. Tell me about yesterday afternoon. Rupert hesitated. I asked my uncle for money. How much? £200. Why? Debts. What sort? Private? Gambling? Rupert said nothing. Parker nodded as though silence were an admission. You became violent, I shouted. You struck the greenhouse door. Yes. And cut your hand. Yes. Then you went to the house? I went to my room. At what time? About 5. Did you see Sir Julian again? No. Wimsey's gaze drifted toward the bloodstain. Your hand, he said. Rupert held it up. There was a narrow cut across the knuckle. When did you bandage it? I didn't. It stopped bleeding. Indeed. Wimsey returned his attention to the newspaper. Parker looked irritated. May I? Rupert looked puzzled. Wimsey indicated the stained sleeve. Rupert extended his arm. Wimsey examined the cloth without touching it. Interesting. What? Nothing. He stepped back. Inspector Parker's patience visibly diminished. Sir Julian had every reason to dislike you. Plenty of people did. And you had every reason to want him dead. Rupert's expression changed. I wanted him frightened. I wanted him to understand what he was doing to me. That's not the same thing. No? No. Rupert said quietly. I had debts. I made a mess of things. He knew it. He enjoyed knowing it. Enjoyed it. He liked being right. Wimsey smiled faintly. An unpleasant vice. Rupert looked at him. You don't know him. No, said Wimsey. But I know the species. Parker shut the folder. We shall return to this. Rupert was escorted from the room. When the door closed, Parker turned to Wimsey. Well? Wimsey walked to the fireplace. Well, what? Do you think he did it? Wimsey looked into the dying fire. I think he had a motive. Motive may open the door to suspicion, but opportunity must cross the threshold, and guilt must be invited inside. That is not an answer. Most answers become less useful when they are given too soon. Parker sighed. You have seen the blood. Yes. You have heard the threats. Yes. And you still won't say? Wimsey glanced toward him. Parker, if a man has muddy boots, a broken temper, and a blood-stained cuff, one may reasonably suspect him of having behaved badly. Murder requires rather more precision. Parker stared at him. Then what would you examine? Wimsey's eyes moved to the corridor beyond the door. The house. The house, certainly. He picked up his gloves. People lie. Houses remember. Parker shook his head. You're impossible. On the contrary. I am perfectly possible. They stepped into the corridor. At the far end, Eleanor Ashcombe was standing beside the portrait of Lady Beatrice. She turned as they approached. Has Rupert been arrested? Not yet, Parker replied. She looked relieved. Wimsey stopped beneath the portrait. For an instant his eyes traveled from Lady Beatrice's painted face to Eleanor's living one. Only attention, Eleanor said quietly. Rupert was capable of anger, but he could not have done this. Why not? Parker asked. She looked toward the attic stairs. Because he would have made certain everyone knew he had done it. Wimsey's mouth twitched. That, he said, is an unexpectedly generous assessment of murder. Eleanor gave him a puzzled look. He bowed slightly. Please don't let me detain you. She walked away. Parker watched. You noticed something. Wimsey put on one glove. I noticed several things. Will you tell me? Not yet. Outside, the rain struck the windows harder. Parker looked toward the attic. I suppose you will tell me when you're ready. My dear fellow, said Wimsey, I shall tell you when the facts are ready. They are generally much better company than theories. He walked on, leaving Parker beside the portrait. For the moment, Rupert Ashcombe remained the obvious suspect, and the blood on his cuff was an exceedingly convenient piece of evidence. Section 4. The Business of Curtains. By noon, Lord Peter Wimsey had acquired the reputation among the inhabitants of Ashcombe Hall of being a man who could find significance in a curtain. This was not unfair. He had spent nearly 10 minutes examining the curtains in the long gallery while Inspector Charles Parker stood behind him with the expression of a policeman contemplating a practical joke. "Are you expecting the murderer to emerge from behind them?" Parker asked. "No. A ghost? Certainly not. A draught?" Wimsey touched the velvet edge with one finger. "Possibly. Drafts are more honest than ghosts and considerably more common." Parker folded his arms. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Nothing." "You've been looking for nothing for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is hardly excessive." Wimsey stepped back. The curtains were heavy green velvet, faded where the afternoon light had found them and black in the folds. One panel was pulled farther across the window than its companion. "Who closes these at night?" "Mrs. Bell, I suppose." "Suppose less. Ask." Mrs. Agnes Bell was summoned. She arrived carrying a tray and regarded the detective with suspicion. "Do you require tea?" "Always. But I require information about the curtains, among other catastrophes." She looked at the windows. "Thomas usually draws them." "Does he?" "Yes." "Every night?" "Usually. Last night?" "I don't remember." Wimsey nodded. "Excellent." Parker stared. "What is excellent?" "The fact that nobody remembers anything until somebody asks." Mrs. Bell frowned. "Sir Julian often left them partly open." "Why?" "He disliked the room being stuffy." "And yesterday?" "They were closed." "By whom?" "I cannot say." Wimsey thanked her. When she had gone, Parker said, "That tells us nothing." "Quite possibly." They proceeded upstairs. At the attic entrance, Wimsey examined the lock without touching it. "Old. Original, I believe," Parker said. "And the key, found inside." "On the floor." "Yes." Wimsey nodded. He looked at the wooden door, then at the gap beneath it. "Sound travels badly through this." "Through a door?" "This one." Parker shrugged. "It is thick. Very." Wimsey tapped it with one knuckle. The sound seemed to disappear into the wood. "Interesting." Parker waited. No explanation followed. Wimsey moved into the attic. The second portrait remained against the chimney breast. Miss Lydia Finch had covered it with linen, but the painted eyes seemed to have survived the concealment with considerable determination. Wimsey ignored the face. Instead, he examined the restoration table. Brushes, scrapers, jars, a palette, several weights used to hold canvases flat. One brass weight was missing, Parker noticed. Could that have been the weapon? It could have been many things. It was found near the body, so I understand. Wimsey picked up another weight and turned it in his fingers. "Where are the others kept?" Miss Lydia Finch appeared at the doorway. "In the cupboard." "How many?" "4. Originally? 5. And one is missing?" "Yes." "Who uses them?" "I do." "Anyone else?" "Sir Julian occasionally." "Eleanor Ashcombe?" Miss Finch hesitated. "During the restoration, she helped me move some materials." Wimsey merely nodded. "Thank you." Miss Finch left. Parker looked at him. "You think that matters?" Wimsey replaced the weight. "I think that 5 is a larger number than 4. That is not helpful. It is not intended to be." They went down to the linen cupboard. The shelves were crowded with folded sheets, blankets, and mothballs. Wimsey studied the arrangement. "Who keeps this cupboard?" "Mrs. Bell." "Does anyone else use it?" "Servants." "Family?" "Rarely." Wimsey pushed one shelf gently. It moved less than an inch. Parker leaned forward. "Loose?" "Perhaps." Wimsey pushed again. The shelf gave a wooden groan. He stopped. For several seconds he examined the wall behind it. Then he stepped away. Parker waited. "What?" Wimsey smiled. "Nothing conclusive. You're enjoying this?" "My dear Parker, detective work is mostly the discovery that objects have been behaving badly." He walked toward the staircase. At the landing stood the grandfather clock. It showed 12 minutes past 1. Wimsey checked his watch. 1:14, he said. Parker looked at the clock. 1:12. "Indeed. You said yesterday it was wrong." "I said it was innocent." "That isn't the same thing." No, innocence and accuracy are different virtues. Wimsey crouched beside the clock. He examined the pendulum, then the face, then the brass casing. Has it always been slow? Thomas Greaves, passing below, stopped. 7 minutes, my lord. Parker looked sharply at him. You knew? Yes. Why didn't you say so yesterday? You did not ask. Wimsey's eyes brightened. An excellent butler's answer. Thomas continued upstairs. Wimsey watched him go. How long has it been 7 minutes slow? Months, Parker said. Has Sir Julian known? Presumably. Presumably is another dangerous word. He rose. At the head of the stairs he noticed a narrow mark in the carpet, a pale line where something heavy had been dragged. He bent over it. Parker joined him. What is that? A carpet mark. I can see that. How reassuring. Wimsey straightened. He did not explain. Instead, he walked to the attic window. The curtains there were drawn unevenly. He looked through the glass at the rain-soaked garden. Then he turned back. Tell me, Parker, how far is the nearest road? Half a mile. And the ground? Muddy. Very. He looked once more at the curtain, then at the brass weights, then toward the linen cupboard. His expression remained almost playful. Parker said, You have something. Wimsey adjusted his cuff. I have several somethings. Meaning that houses are like elderly ladies. If you ask them enough irrelevant questions, they eventually become offended and tell you the truth. He descended the stairs. Behind him, the attic remained silent, but when Parker passed the linen cupboard, he noticed that one shelf was not quite straight. He reached toward it. Don't, said Wimsey from below. Parker withdrew his hand. Why? Wimsey did not turn. Because I have not yet asked it a question. The hollow wall behind the shelves gave no answer. Section 5. The clock that was 7 minutes late. By 1:30, Lord Peter Wimsey had converted the library table into a battlefield of clocks. There were 4. The grandfather clock from the long gallery stood beside Sir Julian's pocket watch. Mrs. Bell's kitchen clock had been brought upstairs, and Inspector Charles Parker had contributed his own wristwatch. Surely, Parker said, this is unnecessary. Almost certainly. Because unnecessary things are frequently informative. Parker looked at the collection. The grandfather clock is 7 minutes slow, precisely, and Sir Julian's watch stopped at 10:11, which tells us only that it stopped at 11 minutes past 10. Parker stared. Wimsey smiled. Let us not ask a watch to confess to a murder merely because it has the misfortune to be dead. Dr. Martin Vale entered carrying his medical bag. I've been thinking about the time of death, he said. Excellent. Thinking is an underrated medical procedure. The doctor ignored this. I was too ready last night to accept the household's account. I would now put the death somewhat earlier. How much earlier? Possibly before 10:30. That is a considerable alteration. My first estimate relied upon circumstances rather than physiology. Wimsey nodded. And the body supports an earlier death, though I cannot give you the precise minute without further examination. Parker looked at his notes. Then let us begin again. At 10:47, Mrs. Bell heard the attic bell. Yes, said Dr. Vale. Therefore Sir Julian might have been alive. Might, said the doctor. Wimsey raised one finger. An important verb, Parker continued. At 10:49, Mrs. Bell reached the attic door. She heard nothing. Correct. At 10:53, Greaves arrived. Yes. At 10:58, the door was forced. Correct. Wimsey drew a sheet of paper toward himself. Now tell me what happened before the bell. Parker consulted his notebook. Dinner ended at approximately 8:45. Sir Julian went upstairs later. Miss Finch says she was with him until 9:24. Approximately. Her watch was checked afterward. It is reliable. Good. She says she left the attic at 9:24. Alone? Yes. Did she hear anyone approaching? No. Wimsey wrote the time down. Sir Julian was seen by nobody. Between 9:24 and 10:47? Not to our knowledge. Wimsey looked up. Then the bell is doing a remarkable amount of work. Parker frowned. It establishes that he summoned someone. Does it? Parker opened his mouth, then closed it. Wimsey did not pursue the point. Instead, he asked, how long would it take to walk from the attic to Eleanor Ashcombe's bedroom? 2 minutes. And from the attic to the main staircase? Less than 1. And from the house to the road? About 6 minutes. In this weather? Perhaps 8. Good. He made another note. Parker watched him. You are calculating whether someone could have left the house. I am calculating several things, such as how long it takes to move through it. Wimsey stood and crossed to the window. Rain streaked the glass. The house is not large enough to hide time, he said softly. Parker heard him. What? Nothing. He returned to the table. Let us consider the attic itself. You said the door is soundproof? Not soundproof exactly, Parker said. Very thick. Could Mrs. Bell have heard a blow? I don't know. Could she have heard a fall? Possibly. Wimsey nodded. That will do. Dr. Vale looked puzzled. Will what do? The uncertainty. Parker sighed. You keep saying that. It is an honest condition. He glanced at Sir Julian's pocket watch again. The hands remained fixed at 10:11. Who wound this? Sir Julian, Parker said. He wound it every morning. Did anyone touch it after the body was found? No. Then it may have stopped when he fell. Dr. Vale examined the watch. There is no obvious reason it should have. Exactly. Parker looked irritated. Could the blow have stopped it? It is possible. Then perhaps the watch gives us the time of death. Wimsey's expression sharpened. Perhaps. He placed the watch down. But if Sir Julian was struck at 10:11, why did nobody hear him? Parker considered the attic, the storm, and the door, and the storm. Perhaps. Wimsey looked up. Then he asked, what time did Eleanor Ashcombe retire? Parker checked his notes. She says approximately 10:14. Did anyone see her? Mrs. Bell saw her on the landing. Before or after the bell? Before. How long before? About half an hour. Wimsey's eyebrows rose. Half an hour. Mrs. Bell was not certain. Parker looked increasingly annoyed. You are making much of uncertainty. I am making much of certainty. It is merely hidden inside the uncertainty. Dr. Vale laughed. Wimsey returned to the clocks. He set his own watch beside the grandfather clock. Then he waited. The grandfather clock ticked. His watch ticked. The room seemed to fill with a sound. Finally, Wimsey said, 7 minutes. Parker nodded. Yes. 7 minutes in a clock. Yes. 7 minutes in a journey. Yes. 7 minutes in a statement. Parker looked at him. What statement? Wimsey smiled. That is the difficulty, Inspector. I have not yet found the statement. He closed his notebook. The afternoon light had become grey and thin. Somewhere in the house a door opened, then shut. Wimsey listened. Tell me, he said, what time did the telephone message from Eleanor reach the solicitor? 10:21. Exactly? Exactly. Recorded? Yes. Genuine? As far as we know. He wrote 10:21 beneath 9:24 and 10:47. 3 times. 3 facts. 3 different kinds of certainty. Parker leaned over the table. What does it give you? Wimsey looked at the 3 figures. It gives me problem. Only a problem? A pretty one. He folded the paper and put it into his pocket. Now, he said, we must find out whether the dead man was ever alive when that bell rang. Parker stared at him. Wimsey's face revealed nothing. Outside, the rain continued against Ashcombe Hall, while the grandfather clock calmly insisted upon being 7 minutes wrong. Section 6. The woman who was not in the family, Mrs. Celia March, arrived at Ashcombe Hall carrying an umbrella, a handbag, and the expression of a woman waiting for the right question. She was 73, small and heavily shawled, with bright eyes. I understand, she announced, that you are investigating Sir Julian's death. Lord Peter Wimsey looked at the biscuit tin she carried. I understand that you have brought refreshments. It contains history. Dangerous. Mrs. March smiled. I was the schoolmistress here for 31 years. I taught half the village, and the other half taught me things they believed I ought not to know. Wimsey indicated a chair. Now, Mrs. March, what precisely do you know about the second portrait? She opened the tin. Inside were photographs, letters, clippings, and one small brass key. Parker frowned. What is the key? Later. Wimsey glanced at him. Let us permit chronology to have its little joke. Mrs. March removed a photograph. This was taken in 1898. The picture showed Lady Beatrice Ashcombe beside a garden seat, younger than in the portraits. Beside her stood another woman. She was perhaps 20 years old, dark-haired, plainly dressed, and looking directly into the camera. Miss Finch leaned forward. Who is she? That, said Mrs. March, is Clara Vale. Beatrice Ashcombe entered the room at that moment. She stopped when she saw the photograph. Where did you get that? Mrs. March looked almost pleased. From your family, naturally. Beatrice's face hardened. That photograph should not exist. Yet here it is. Wimsey examined it. Clara Vale? Yes. Relation? Mrs. March looked at Beatrice. Then at Eleanor, who had entered silently behind her aunt. She was Lady Beatrice's daughter. The room became very quiet. Miss Finch looked from one woman to the other. But the family records say she died as an infant, Mrs. March finished. Yes, they do. Parker looked puzzled. Are you suggesting the records were falsified? I am suggesting that respectable families have occasionally regarded truth as a thing to be edited. Wimsey took the photograph. Where was Clara raised? First here, secretly, then in Norwich. Her name was changed. She married a schoolmaster named Vale. Any children? One daughter. And descendants? Mrs. March nodded. Quite a number, if the family tree I reconstructed is correct. Beatrice spoke sharply. You have no right to pry into private grief. Mrs. March looked at her. Private grief is one thing, public lies are another. Wimsey turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. He read it silently. What does it say? Parker asked. An address. Whose? Wimsey looked toward Mrs. March. She answered, Clara's. Do you know what became of her? She died young. How young? 24. And Lady Beatrice? She never acknowledged her. Wimsey returned the photograph. Miss Finch was staring at the second portrait. There is something in the painting, she said. What? Look at the cabinet behind Lady Beatrice. They moved closer. The painting was dark, but the polished surface of a cabinet had caught a faint reflection. A young woman's outline could be seen there. Not clearly, but unmistakably. Clara, Mrs. March whispered. Good Lord. Parker stepped nearer. So the second portrait proves the photograph? No, said Wimsey. It suggests that the artist saw someone who was not supposed to be there. He did not elaborate. Beatrice turned away. Julian found it, she said. Wimsey looked at her. When? Some weeks ago. Did he speak to you about it? No. Did he know about Clara? I believe so. Believe. Beatrice clasped her hands. My brother had been examining old papers. He became convinced that the family history was wrong. And what did he intend to do? She hesitated. I don't know. Eleanor spoke for the first time. He wanted to destroy everything. The words came quickly. Parker turned toward her. What do you mean? Eleanor looked at the portrait. He wanted to expose things that had been buried for generations. Wimsey watched her. Did he say why? No. Did he mention Clara Vale by name? Eleanor's eyes flicked toward him. Yes. When? Yesterday. The answer was quiet. Parker made a note. What else did he say? Eleanor swallowed. That the truth would have to be told. Wimsey did not ask her what she thought that meant. Instead, he returned his attention to the photograph. Mrs. March, why have you kept this all these years? Because nobody else would. She closed it. Lady Beatrice was my headmistress for 1 year. Clara used to visit the school garden. She was kind to children. Then she disappeared from the records, as though kindness had become an administrative error. Wimsey smiled faintly. History is often written by people who dislike inconvenient relatives. Mrs. March studied him. You think the portrait matters? I think portraits are capable of being troublesome. Do you think Clara's story caused Sir Julian's death? Wimsey's expression became unreadable. I think Sir Julian knew something he considered important. Important enough to die for. People have died for considerably less. Eleanor looked suddenly toward the window. Rain had begun again, Parker noticed. So the family secret gives several people a possible motive. Wimsey nodded. Indeed. Does it give us a murderer? No. His answer was immediate. Not yet. Beatrice gathered her shawl. This should never have been discussed. Mrs. March laughed softly. My dear Beatrice, that is precisely why it has survived. She left. Nobody spoke. Then Miss Finch looked again at the hidden portrait. The painted Lady Beatrice seemed to be listening toward the reflected figure behind her. Eleanor stepped closer. Her composure finally slipped. Only for a second. Her lips parted, her eyes fixed upon Clara's face. Then she turned away. Wimsey noticed. He said nothing. He merely placed the photograph beside the portrait and stood very still. The second woman had been erased from the family, but not from the picture, and certainly not from memory. Section 7. The window that could not have been open. The window in the attic was found open by less than 2 inches, which Inspector Charles Parker regarded as an encouraging discovery and Lord Peter Wimsey regarded as an invitation to become tiresome. It was closed when I first entered, Parker said. Was it? Yes. And afterward? Open. By whom? No one admits touching it. Wimsey examined the latch. Rain had ceased, but the sill was wet. An excellent escape route, Parker said. An appalling one. You think it impossible? I think it impolite to accuse the weather before hearing its evidence. Parker looked at him. Wimsey pointed toward the sill. Observe. There was no mud, no grit, no smear from a hand. The roof outside was coated with rainwater and chimney soot, but the inner sill remained clean except for a narrow line of dust disturbed near the latch. Someone opened it from inside, Parker said. Probably. Then closed it? Possibly. But it was found open. Yes. Wimsey did not explain. He stepped outside onto the narrow roof ledge. My dear fellow, said Wimsey, I am investigating murder, not attempting to improve the weather. He crouched and examined the tiles. No footprints, no displaced dust, no mark where a shoe had rested. The roof descended toward the garden at an alarming angle. Could anyone have escaped this way? Not without leaving evidence. Exactly. Wimsey returned indoors. Thomas Greaves was waiting in the doorway. You know the attic well, Wimsey said. Yes, my lord. The bell wiring. Thomas's expression remained blank. What about it? You repaired it last month. Yes. Could the bell ring without the cord being pulled? No. Could an electrical fault cause it? Not normally. Not normally. It would require a short circuit. And would that sound like the ordinary bell? Possibly. Wimsey nodded. Thank you. Parker waited until Thomas had gone. You're interested in the bell again. I have always been fond of bells. You said yesterday that they might lie. Did I? You did. Then perhaps I was being rude. They descended to the linen cupboard. The shelf remained slightly crooked. Parker reached for it. This time Wimsey did not stop him. The shelf moved forward. Behind it was darkness. Miss Lydia Finch gave a small cry. Good heavens! A passage ran behind the wall, scarcely wide enough for a broad man to turn around. It led upward toward the attic. Parker stared. The maintenance passage, apparently. Why wasn't this on the plans? Because, said Thomas Greaves from behind them, it was sealed before I came here. Sealed? Yes. Then how is it open? Thomas examined the shelf. I don't know. Wimsey looked at the wood. Parker said, Someone has used this recently. Possibly. Could someone leave the attic through here? Yes. And reach the house without using the stairs? Yes. Parker turned sharply toward him. That changes things. Wimsey looked at the passage. It changes the architecture. What about the murderer? Wimsey smiled. You are becoming impatient. Mrs. Agnes Bell appeared carrying a basket of folded linen. She stopped when she saw the passage. I thought that was blocked. So did everyone else. I've never been inside it. Did you know it existed? Yes. Who used it? Servants years ago, during roof repairs perhaps. Could Sir Julian have used it? He might. Could Eleanor Ashcombe have known about it? Mrs. Bell hesitated. I don't know. Wimsey's eyes remained on her. That is an entirely respectable answer. Mrs. Bell shifted the basket. There is something else. Parker turned. What? On the night Sir Julian died, when I went to the attic door, I thought I heard something. What? A little scrape. From inside. I believe so. Why didn't you mention it? I wasn't sure. Wimsey nodded. What sort of scrape? Like a shelf being moved. Nobody spoke. Parker looked toward the hidden passage. Wimsey said nothing. He walked through it. The passage smelled of linen and plaster. At the far end was a small panel behind the attic shelves. It opened inward. From there, the attic writing desk was visible. Wimsey stood perfectly still. Then he turned. Parker entered behind him. How long would it take to pass through? Perhaps 30 seconds. And if somebody came down here after the murder, they could reach the main house quickly. Then the locked door proves nothing. Wimsey raised one eyebrow. Parker stared. Why? Because it would be premature. He returned through the passage. At the entrance, he noticed Eleanor Ashcombe standing in the corridor. She had evidently come without being heard. Have you found something? She asked. Parker answered. A passage. Eleanor looked at the opening. Her face remained calm. For one instant, however, her eyes moved toward the attic, then toward the bell mechanism. Wimsey noticed the movement. He said nothing. Eleanor smiled. I had forgotten that passage existed. Many things are forgotten in old houses, Wimsey replied. She walked away. Parker watched her. You saw that? Wimsey adjusted his cuff. I saw a lady looking at a hole in a wall. You saw more than that. I generally do. They returned to the attic. The window still stood ajar. Parker examined the latch again. Someone wanted us to think of an escape. Wimsey looked toward the rain-dark roof. Perhaps. And the passage gives us a real escape. Perhaps. Then why leave the window open? Wimsey considered the question. His expression remained unreadable. At last he said, because sometimes the most obvious door is not the door somebody used. Parker waited for more. None came. Wimsey crossed the attic and stopped beside the bell. The mechanism was old, brass-fitted and dark with age. He looked at it for several seconds. Then he withdrew his hand before touching anything. Behind him, the window moved in the wind. The latch clicked. The sound was ordinary and innocent. Wimsey turned his head. Very curious, he murmured. And somewhere inside the wall, unseen gears gave a faint metallic tick. Section 8. The rehearsal of a dead man. At 10:47 that evening, Lord Peter Wimsey arranged the inhabitants of Ashcombe Hall as though preparing them for a rather expensive theatrical production. Inspector Charles Parker stood beside the attic door. Mrs. Agnes Bell occupied the landing where she had stood the night before. Thomas Greaves waited below the stairs. Dr. Martin Vale remained near the writing desk, while Miss Lydia Finch stood beside the second portrait. Eleanor Ashcombe stood apart. Why precisely 10:47? Parker asked. Because, said Wimsey, it is the hour at which our deceased host is alleged to have demonstrated the remarkable feat of ringing a bell. You still doubt that? I doubt nothing. I merely decline to believe everything. He checked his watch. Places, please. Parker looked irritated. This is absurd. Most useful experiments appear absurd until they succeed. The attic was silent. The storm had weakened to a steady rain. Through the window came the distant sound of the sea. Wimsey walked to the bell mechanism. He did not touch it. Instead, he examined the cord. Mrs. Bell, when you heard the bell last night, did it sound exactly like this? Yes. Sharp? Yes. One ring? Yes. Not two? No. Thank you. He moved away. Parker watched him. What are we waiting for? The dead man. Parker sighed. At precisely 10:47, the bell rang. Nobody moved. The sound was sharp, metallic, and unmistakable. Mrs. Bell crossed herself. Thomas Greaves looked toward the mechanism. Miss Finch stepped backward. Dr. Vale stared at Wimsey. Eleanor Ashcombe did not move at all. Parker was the first to speak. Who pulled it? Wimsey smiled. Nobody. Parker crossed the room. The cord hung perfectly still. He examined the bell, then the wiring. That's impossible. An unfortunate word. You arranged this. Certainly. How? Wimsey glanced at Thomas. You repaired the mechanism. Yes. You said yesterday that it could not ring without the cord. Thomas's face tightened. I said it could not ring normally. Quite. Wimsey pointed to a small junction box concealed beneath the wooden casing. There is an auxiliary contact here. Thomas stared. I did not put that there. No, said Wimsey. Parker crouched. Could it have been installed recently? Possibly. Could it have been timed? Thomas examined the wiring. With the proper device, yes. Wimsey nodded. He did not look at Eleanor. He did not need to. Instead, he turned toward the writing desk. Now we shall perform the second part. Parker followed. What second part? The journey. Wimsey walked to the hidden panel. He opened it and entered the maintenance passage. The others followed. He timed the passage with his watch. 38 seconds later, they emerged into the linen cupboard. From there, the staircase took less than a minute. Mrs. Bell looked pale. I could have come through here. Indeed, and reached the landing without using the attic door. Yes, Parker looked at the attic door. So the locked door was staged. Wimsey raised a finger. Careful. Parker stopped. Why? Because we have demonstrated possibility, not history. Parker exhaled sharply. You are infuriating. I have been told worse by better men. They returned to the attic. Wimsey stood beside the writing desk. Doctor. Vale, suppose Sir Julian received a fatal blow at 9:58. The doctor looked at him. You have chosen a precise time. Suppose. I would expect death shortly afterward. Could he have rung the bell at 10:47? No. The answer came quietly. Wimsey nodded. Thank you. Parker stared. You've never said the time was 9:58. No. Why 9:58? Wimsey's eyes rested upon the second portrait. Because the arithmetic is beginning to become rather persuasive. He moved toward the brass restoration weights. One was still missing from its usual place. Parker looked at it. The weapon. Possibly. You think it was used? Wimsey said nothing. He crossed to the covered portrait. Miss Finch uncovered it. The painted Lady Beatrice stared outward with that peculiar expression of alarm. Wimsey studied the cabinet reflected behind her. Then he looked toward Eleanor. She had gone very still. Parker noticed. Miss Ashcombe? Yes? Did Sir Julian ever tell you about the portrait? Eleanor's voice remained controlled. He told me only that it had been discovered. Nothing more? No? Wimsey turned away. Very well. Parker looked dissatisfied. That's all? For now. The detective walked to the corridor clock. It showed 10:47. He checked his watch. 10:47 exactly, Parker said. The clocks agree now. Of course, you said the grandfather clock was 7 minutes slow. It is. Parker stared at the face. Then at Wimsey. How can it be 10:47? Wimsey smiled. Because this is not the grandfather clock. Parker looked embarrassed. Mrs. Bell almost laughed. Wimsey's smile broadened. Never underestimate the educational value of embarrassment. He returned to the attic. The room seemed different now. The bell had rung without a hand touching it. The passage offered an unseen route. The window offered a false one. The clock offered another uncertainty. And the second portrait watched them all. Eleanor approached the painting. Why are you doing this? She asked. Wimsey looked at her. Doing what? Making everyone repeat the night. Because repetitions are useful. They reveal what was impossible to notice the first time. She looked at him steadily. And have you noticed something? Wimsey smiled. I have noticed several things. Which? He glanced toward the bell, then the hidden passage, then the brass weight. Finally, he looked at the portrait. I should hate to spoil the performance. Parker groaned. Peter, Wimsey turned toward him. Yes? You know something. Wimsey put his hands behind his back. Perhaps. Then say it. Not until the actors have finished their parts. The bell mechanism clicked softly. Nobody moved. Then, from somewhere inside the old house, came the faint sound of a clock striking the quarter hour. Wimsey listened. His expression sharpened. He said nothing. The rehearsal was finally over. The dead man's alibi had just rung again. Section 9. The unmasking. Lord Peter Wimsey assembled them beneath the two portraits. Inspector Charles Parker stood beside the fireplace. Rupert Ashcombe leaned against a cabinet. Beatrice Ashcombe sat rigidly. Dr. Martin Vale, Thomas Greaves, Mrs. Agnes Bell, and Miss Lydia Finch occupied the remaining space. Eleanor Ashcombe stood alone. Wimsey looked from the famous portrait to the hidden one. "Two portraits," he said, "and one family history. The portraits have been more truthful." Nobody answered. Parker folded his arms. "You said you were ready." "Yes. And you know who killed Sir Julian?" "I do." His gaze settled upon Eleanor. "It was you," she smiled. "That is absurd. Let us examine the absurdity." He turned to the others. "Sir Julian did not die at 10:47. He died at approximately 9:58. Dr. Vale looked sharply at him. "That is considerably earlier than my first estimate." "Because your first estimate depended upon the bell." "Yes, and the bell depended upon an assumption that Sir Julian rang it." "Exactly." Wimsey walked toward the staircase. "Miss Finch left Sir Julian at 9:24. After that, nobody saw him alive. There is no reliable witness placing him alive later." Parker nodded slowly. "The pocket watch stopped at 10:11. "A tempting clue," said Wimsey, "but it tells us only when the mechanism stopped." He indicated the brass restoration weight. The weapon was one of 5 weights kept beside the restoration materials. One disappeared, and later its position was disturbed. Sir Julian had been struck from behind. Eleanor said nothing. Wimsey continued. "At 9:58, while the house believed itself occupied by ordinary domestic life, Sir Julian was killed in the attic. The thick door and storm made the sound difficult to hear." Miss Finch lowered her eyes. "Afterward, the murderer needed one thing: time." Parker looked toward the bell. "Because everyone believed the bell proved Sir Julian was alive." "Yes, a bell proves only that a bell rang." Wimsey led them to the mechanism. "The demonstration last night settled that point. The bell can be made to ring without the cord being pulled. The repaired wiring contains an auxiliary contact. A simple timer could close that circuit at a chosen moment." Thomas Greaves spoke quietly. "I did not install it." "No, but someone who knew the mechanism could exploit it." Wimsey looked toward Eleanor. "Someone who had helped Miss Finch move restoration materials and therefore had reason to know the attic's arrangements." Eleanor's face remained composed. "You cannot prove I touched it. Not from the bell alone." He turned to the grandfather clock. "And then there is our innocent liar. The gallery clock is 7 minutes slow. It has been so for months. That fact is genuine. The mistake was ours. We treated every time in the house as though it came from the same clock." Parker nodded. "The 10:47 bell, the slow clock, the doctor's estimate. Precisely. The false chronology was built from true facts interpreted incorrectly." Wimsey returned to the table. "Now consider Eleanor's movements. She was seen on the landing at 10:14. That sighting is genuine. Her telephone call to the solicitor was recorded at 10:21. That too is genuine." Parker looked puzzled. "Then what does that prove?" "Nothing by itself. That is the point. The alibi was not manufactured by making false events. It was manufactured by selecting genuine events and allowing others to attach the wrong meaning to them." He paused. "The murderer killed Sir Julian at 9:58, escaped through the old maintenance passage, returned to the main house, and was seen by Mrs. Bell at 10:14. Later, the telephone recording placed her in her room at 10:21. At 10:47, the altered bell supplied the illusion that Sir Julian had summoned Mrs. Bell." Parker stared at Eleanor. "The passage?" "Yes." Wimsey indicated the linen cupboard. "The locked attic door was never the miracle it appeared to be. The murderer left through the concealed maintenance route and closed the panel behind her. The door could remain locked from within because the murderer did not need to use it." Rupert suddenly spoke. "Then why the window? A false escape route sends investigators outside." Wimsey turned toward the attic window. There were no footprints or mud. It was theater. Eleanor's hands tightened. Wimsey noticed. The final difficulty is motive. Beatrice closed her eyes. Wimsey looked at the second portrait. Sir Julian discovered Clara Vale. The hidden portrait showed that Lady Beatrice had an illegitimate daughter who survived and left descendants. Sir Julian intended to reveal that truth and change his will. For him, honesty had become more important than reputation. Eleanor spoke. He meant to destroy us. No, said Wimsey. He meant to destroy the lie. You do not understand. She shook her head. My mother built her entire life upon that name. I built mine upon hers. If he exposed Clara, everything would become shame, gossip, questions. We would be strangers in our own family. Parker stepped forward. But still murder. Yes. Wimsey lifted the cleaning cloth found among the restoration materials. There is one final physical connection. A trace of brass polish remained on this cloth. It links the material used in the attic to the displaced weight. Eleanor stared at it. You cannot prove that was mine. He placed the cloth beside the photograph. But the evidence does not stand alone. The bell mechanism, the passage, your knowledge of the attic, your movements, the telephone call, and the false chronology form one chain. The cleverness of your crime, Miss Ashcombe, lay in persuading everyone that the question was when Sir Julian was alive. It was not. The useful question was when he ceased to be alive. Silence filled the gallery. Eleanor looked at the second portrait. She began quietly to weep. The frightened painted woman seemed to look at her. Page, section 10, the lady in the second portrait. Eleanor did not sit down. For several seconds she remained beneath the two portraits, looking from the painted face of Lady Beatrice to the hidden likeness of Clara Vale. The distinction between them seemed suddenly cruel. One had been honored, framed, catalogued, and remembered. The other had been concealed behind a chimney. Inspector Charles Parker stepped forward. You have heard Lord Peter Wimsey's evidence, Eleanor answered calmly. Evidence? Her voice was almost perfectly steady. He has constructed a story. Wimsey said nothing. Parker frowned. The bell mechanism. I knew nothing about it. The passage. I had forgotten it existed. The restoration materials. I helped Miss Finch move them once. The telephone call. I made it. The cleaning cloth. I touched many things in the attic. Parker opened his mouth. Eleanor raised one hand. No, let me finish. She looked at Wimsey. You have arranged facts until they resemble guilt. Wimsey's expression remained courteous. Facts are occasionally rather obliging. You have no confession. No. No witness saw me strike Sir Julian. No. No one saw me enter the attic after Miss Finch left. No. Then you have suspicion, not certainty. Wimsey inclined his head. Suspicion was never intended to be the conclusion. Parker glanced at him. Eleanor saw the movement. You have not proved it. Perhaps not to your satisfaction. To anyone's. Dr. Martin Vale shifted uneasily. Miss Ashcombe, the medical evidence supports an earlier death. Supports it, she said. It does not establish 9:58. No. Then even that is uncertain. Wimsey spoke gently. Death is rarely punctual enough to satisfy a railway timetable. Eleanor almost smiled. It vanished at once. Beatrice Ashcombe suddenly said, Eleanor. The younger woman turned. What? You should tell them. Eleanor stared at her aunt. You? Beatrice's face had gone white. I knew about Clara. The confession seemed to weaken something inside Eleanor. How long? Since I was a girl. And you said nothing. What could I say? The truth. Beatrice looked at the hidden portrait. The truth was not wanted. Eleanor laughed once, without humor. Exactly. Parker approached her. Did Sir Julian threaten to expose Clara's existence? He said he would tell everyone. When? Yesterday. And did he intend to change his will? Yes. Would that have affected you? Eleanor looked toward him. It would have affected everything. Your inheritance? My name. That answer silenced the room. Wimsey watched her. Eleanor continued. You think this was greed? It was not. Rupert wanted money. I wanted nothing from Sir Julian except silence. Rupert looked down. Eleanor's composure finally broke. He had spent years pretending that our family was clean. Then suddenly he discovered that honesty was fashionable. She laughed bitterly. He wanted to publish letters. He wanted genealogies examined. He wanted Clara's descendants acknowledged. He called it justice. "And you called it what?" Parker asked. "Cruelty." Wimsey spoke softly. "Cruelty is not murder." "No." She looked at him. "But sometimes it feels like murder when somebody tears away the life you have spent 30 years defending." Dr. Vale lowered his head. "Mrs." Agnes Bell began to cry quietly. Thomas Greaves remained motionless. Parker said, "Did you kill him?" Eleanor did not answer. "Miss Ashcombe." She closed her eyes. For a moment the only sound was rain against the windows. Then she opened them. "I went to the attic." Parker took a breath. "When?" "After Miss Finch left." "What happened?" "Sir Julian was there." "Did you argue?" "Yes." "About Clara?" "Yes." "About the will?" "Yes." "Then what?" Eleanor looked at the second portrait. "He said he would tell them everything." "And you?" "I begged him not to." "Did he refuse?" "Yes." Her voice became smaller. "He said that a family built upon a lie was already dead." Nobody moved. Eleanor continued, "I told him he had no right." "What happened then?" "I picked up the weight." Parker's face tightened. "Why?" "I don't know." Wimsey corrected her quietly. "You know." She looked at him. "You were frightened." "Yes." "You were angry." "Yes." "And you believed that one act could preserve the life you had built." Eleanor whispered. "Yes." Parker said, "And you struck him?" She nodded. "Once." The room seemed suddenly colder. "Then I locked the door and escaped through the passage." "Yes." "And the bell?" Eleanor looked toward the attic stairs. "I had seen the wiring while helping Miss Finch. I thought I could make it ring later." "At 10:47? "Yes." "Why that time?" "So they would believe he was alive." "And the telephone call?" "I made it deliberately, to create an alibi, to make my movements seem ordinary." Parker closed his notebook. Eleanor looked exhausted. "I thought I had made it perfect." Wimsey's expression softened. "No." She looked at him. "You made it elaborate. Perfection is considerably simpler." Eleanor gave a faint, broken smile. "That sounds like something you would say." "I am afraid it is." Parker approached. "You are under arrest for the murder of Sir Julian Ashcombe." Eleanor did not resist. Before she left, she stopped beneath the hidden portrait. "Will you destroy it?" Beatrice answered before Wimsey could. "No." Eleanor looked at her. "Why not?" "Because it is hers." The words settled over the room. Clara Vale had been denied a name, a place, and a history. At last she had a face. Wimsey turned away. Parker waited beside the door. "Come along, Miss Ashcombe." Eleanor followed him. Wimsey remained beneath the portraits for another moment. The second portrait no longer seemed frightening. It seemed merely sad. He murmured, "The truth is a poor guest, but a persistent one." Then he walked downstairs. The house, which had spent generations keeping secrets, had finally become quiet. In the gallery, morning light touched the frames and revealed every crack in the old varnish. Behind him, Parker closed the door softly. No bell rang this time, and nobody mistook the silence for innocence. For once, the house had nothing to say, and the dead required silence. The rain had stopped. A pale September sun entered the long gallery, touching the two portraits with an almost indecent cheerfulness. Lady Beatrice looked less formidable in daylight. Clara Vale looked younger. Lord Peter Wimsey stood before them with a cup of coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Inspector Charles Parker joined him. "You're still here. An excellent observation. I expected you to have gone. I have a weakness for breakfast." Parker glanced toward the portraits. "Strange ending. Most murders have the bad manners to end strangely, and the story will be in every newspaper. Almost certainly." He studied Clara's portrait. "Poor woman." Parker looked at him. "You mean Clara?" "I mean nearly everybody. Even Eleanor." Wimsey considered. "Especially Eleanor." Parker was silent. "You sympathize with her. I understand her. That isn't the same thing. No, it is considerably more dangerous." Wimsey tapped ash into a silver tray. "She believed she was defending the living against the dead. She merely forgot that the dead have a habit of returning in the form of facts." Parker smiled faintly. You really cannot resist a phrase. My dear Parker, language is one of the few inexpensive luxuries available to detectives. From the breakfast room came the sound of china. Mrs. Agnes Bell entered carrying a fresh pot of coffee. Will you have more, my lord? Gladly, she poured. There's something I've been wondering. Wimsey raised an eyebrow, an occupation shared by philosophers, murderers, and underpaid servants. Mrs. Bell smiled. Why did you know the bell was wrong? I didn't, but you suspected. Suspecting is merely thinking in a hat. She laughed. I don't understand, nor should you. It is a professional affliction. She glanced at the portrait. Will Clara's picture remain? I believe so. Good. Mrs. Bell looked relieved. She ought to have been remembered. Wimsey nodded. Yes. After she left, Parker said, You could have exposed the family history without solving the murder. Of course. Then why did you pursue it? Because murder is a rather emphatic method of editing the family tree. Parker chuckled. They walked toward the front door. On the hall table lay Sir Julian's pocket watch. Parker picked it up. 10:11. Forever. Do you suppose it stopped at the moment of the blow? Possibly. And yet the true time was 9:58. Yes. Parker looked thoughtful. One broken watch, one slow clock, one false bell, and one hidden passage. Quite. All of them together made the alibi. No, that is the important distinction. Parker waited. Wimsey smiled. They made the alibi believable. Eleanor made the alibi. Parker nodded. That is the whole thing. That is the whole thing. Outside, the gravel drive glittered after the rain. A motorcar waited near the gate. Wimsey paused before stepping into it. He looked back at Ashcombe Hall. He put one foot into the car. Parker stopped him. One last question. Dangerous. What fooled you? Wimsey looked genuinely amused. Nothing fooled me. Nothing. Oh, several things attempted it. The blood-stained cuff was particularly enthusiastic. Parker smiled. Ruppert was innocent. Of murder. Of everything else? Wimsey gave him a sideways glance. My dear Parker, innocence is not a general certificate of good character. They drove away from the house. For several miles neither spoke. Then Parker said, What will happen to the second portrait? Miss Finch will restore it. And the family. They will discover that ancestry is like an old carpet. Pull one thread and everybody begins shouting. And Clara's descendants? Perhaps they will finally receive the recognition that was denied them. Parker looked out of the window. That seems almost cheerful. Don't be alarmed. Human beings will find a way to complicate it. The car turned onto the main road. Behind them, Ashcombe Hall grew smaller, its chimneys rising against the clean sky. Wimsey leaned back. I think, he said, that the second portrait has performed its duty. Parker looked at him. What duty? To remind the living that a face concealed is not necessarily a face forgotten. He closed his eyes. A moment later, he opened them again. And, Parker? Yes? Next time someone tells you that a bell proves a man was alive, ask whether the bell possesses a medical degree. Parker laughed aloud. That is your final word? Certainly. It sounds suspiciously like a quotation. It is. Whose? Wimsey smiled. Mine, unfortunately. The great men are becoming difficult to borrow from. The motorcar disappeared along the wet road. At Ashcombe Hall, sunlight rested upon the two portraits. For the first time they hung side by side. One belonged to the official history of the house. The other belonged to the truth. And truth, Wimsey reflected, was seldom handsome, seldom convenient, and almost never punctual. But it had one considerable advantage. It arrived eventually. The case was closed. The murderer was taken away. The hidden daughter was restored to the family record, and Lord Peter Wimsey, having solved another unpleasant problem with the aid of clocks, curtains, a bell, and one exceedingly stubborn portrait, went home to breakfast. As he settled into his chair, he opened the newspaper and frowned at the headline. For a brief moment he allowed himself the luxury of satisfaction. Then, remembering that satisfaction was merely vanity wearing evening clothes, he returned to the newspaper, ordered another coffee, and began to read about somebody else's scandal. with considerable interest indeed. "Portrait murder at country house," he read. He sighed. "Really," he murmured, "they make everything sound so vulgar." Then he turned the page, and somewhere in the silence behind him, an old clock ticked steadily onward, 7 minutes wrong. This time, nobody mistook it for the truth. If you have formed your own theory, tell us which clue deceived you most: the blood-stained cuff, the silent passage, the stopped watch, or the bell that rang for a dead man. And if you enjoyed this mystery, join us for the next case, where another respectable house will doubtless conceal another thoroughly disreputable secret.